In this video, we are going to once again be practicing our shading skills and applying a little bit of reductive drawing. So remember that reductive drawing just means we are pulling away the media. So whether that is charcoal or graphite, it's when you're using your eraser to pull the media off. So in this one, we're going to be working with pencils, erasers. You may want to have a pencil sharpener handy, a tissue. Definitely have your grayscale around. And then what I would like you to do is go and look around your house and find something that is about 2 inches across and that's a circle. So this is just about 2 inches. I would not go much larger than this, and I wouldn't go too much smaller. So maybe somewhere between 2 and 2.5 inches for the circle. So this just happened to be the lid to a bottle of hairspray. You can find all sorts of things in your house that are circular. You're looking for something that's about 2 inches. If you don't have a ruler, that's about 2 knuckles across. All right, so once you've gathered your materials, we're gonna move into the first step. So the first thing you're going to be doing is you are going to be sketching around this object that you found. So you're going to place that not at the very top, not in the very center. So if we're approximating the center of the paper about here, I'm gonna move it a little bit above center, okay? And then what I'm gonna do is very lightly, I am going to trace around my object. And that's the first step. So the next thing we're gonna do, using our grayscale, we're gonna start by trying to achieve about a 3 in our background. So when we start shading this one, I'm going to encourage you to actually work in a circular motion as you're shading. You wanna go pretty lightly around that circle to start. So you may need to turn your paper as you're working. And then of course, you're going to be going back in and blending this with your tissue. And again, what you're trying to achieve is about a level 3. So we'll come back in a couple of minutes and we'll see what my paper looks like once I've finished this step. So this is what it looks like after a few minutes of shading. A few tips and things I want to point out is that it is going to be important for you to work in a circular motion. So as you saw in the clip right before this, I was definitely turning my paper as I worked. So even as I went out further, my pencil's moving in that circular motion and I'm actually turning that paper as I work. The next thing I want to point out is that you want to make sure you're working on a smooth surface, because if you're not, it's definitely going to pick up the texture underneath. I would also advise you to work with one pencil. Depending on the type of pencil you're using, you're going to get a different value of graphite, meaning a different shade. So for consistency's purpose, use one pencil unless you have some actual artist pencils at home. And then of course, you're welcome to use those. If you're familiar with those, again, different pencils will give you different values and results. So if you do happen to find that you have a pencil that has a significantly more dark value, you could definitely use that at a later point in our project. So if you have, for example, what's called an ebony pencil, which gives you really, really dark, almost black, you could use that later on. But certainly a regular pencil is fine for this, okay? So this is about where I am right now. So let's look on the value scale to try and figure out. So I'm probably a little bit less than a 3, but definitely more than a 2. So I may continue to work on building up that value around the circle. But for now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead in with a clean tissue and working in a circular motion, I'm going to begin blending that value out, okay? And as you know, or should know from the last drawing, the tissue will pick up some of that pigment and lift it off of the paper. So if that happens, you're gonna probably go back in and layer on more of the value that you're looking for. Okay, so we'll come back in a couple minutes and see what this looks like. Okay, so I've added a bit more value to my paper, and now it's more about a 4, which is fine, because we can go back in with our eraser, and what we're going to do is we are going to begin lifting off some of the value that was built up around that circle. And again, I'm working in a circular motion, and I'm actually very gently dragging the eraser. So I'm not putting a lot of pressure on it right now. And I am just going to lift off a very small amount of the value that's been added. And again, working in that circular motion, very gently. And if you've got some graphite or pencil, I should say, either one, inside of the moon, if you didn't know we're drawing a moon, what you're going to do later is you'll go back in with an eraser and fully lift that off. So don't worry about that for now. So it's fine. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to leave that at about this level right now. You can always go back and pull off more and work on refining this at a later point in the art making process. What I want to show you now is the next step. So we've already gotten, I've already gotten to about a 4 on my paper. So if you haven't gotten to a 4, you want to work and build this area up to a 4. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go with our darkest value, so about a 5, around the outside edges. And we're going to work from the outside in for this. We're not going to work directly beside what we just lifted. We are going to start down here at the bottom. And I'm going to hold my pencil a little bit lower, but I'm going to put more pressure on it, but I'm not holding it with a super tight grip. So I'm holding it about here, but I am putting more pressure with my hand. And I still want you to be working in that circular motion. Now, as you're working, the further away you get from the moon, the darker I would like you to build up that pigment. Okay, so holding it about here, notice I don't have a tight grip. I'm holding it with my hand like this. And I'm just putting more pressure onto the pencil. Again, I'm working in that circular motion. And we'll come back and see what this looks like once I've fully added that on, so you can see what yours should look like in a couple of minutes. Okay, so I've spent some time building up the value around the moon, still working in that circular motion. You can see at the top in some areas I've hit the 5, whereas at the bottom I may be a little bit too light, so I may spend some time working on building that up further. But what I want to show you now is what you're going to do with your tissue is you're going to start on the bottom or outside edge, and again you're going to work in that circular motion. And we're going to work from the outside edge to the inner section around the moon. And again, with shading, it takes time building up those layers. What most students struggle with when they first begin shading is really putting enough pressure on to get that really dark value. And having that mix of really dark and really bright white is really what makes your artwork pop a lot of the time. So being able to really render all these values, putting the time in to really get them to work is important. All right, so I am coming up around this edge now, continuing to go in a circular motion. So we don't want a defined line right now between these. And I'm going to work from this edge in. Be careful not to tear your paper as you're working. Okay, so here's what it looks like right now. I am probably going to go back in and spend a little bit more time layering on some more of that pencil, the graphite, and then I'll come back and show you the next step. Okay, so I've spent some more time building up the pigment, like I told you I was going to, especially around the upper edges. So it's funny because you get a bit of a reflection here, but this is some of the darkest values I have going. So if I compare that to my value scale, which has gotten a little wrinkly here, you'll see that I'm about at a 5 around the edges, and definitely up through the center here. So if you look at the side, this is a bit more of a 4, and that's okay because we're going to be putting some clouds in with our eraser. So it's all right if the edges around the bottom are maybe a little bit lighter, more of a 4 than a 5. So you can see hopefully that there's a little bit of a difference happening there. We've got some values like the 3 and a 2 happening, and we're eventually going to have that nice bright 1 back in our moon. Okay, so we've taken a look at our values, and now what I'm going to do is I am going to attempt to make it, because this is going to sound funny to you because I've just spent all this time talking about working in a circular motion. We're still going to do that, but we're also going to ease up on that a little bit to make it a little bit more realistic here in a second. So I'm going to continue to blend this out. I'm going to work from the bottom, and I'm going to pull some of that pigment up. So I'm still going in that circular motion just for this part. And then as I get closer to this section, I'm going to start kind of going in small circles to blend this out. And I might even take some of it up towards the moon. Okay. So you'll notice that my tissue has quite a bit of pencil on it at this point. You don't want to be too rough when you're blending, just gentle rubbing. And again, as I'm getting closer, I begin to do those smaller circular motions. So on the outer edges, you know, moving my hand back and forth in a circular motion. And then as I bring it in, starting to do more of those smaller circles. You can also begin to do the smaller circles throughout. And then what we're going to do is we are going to begin using our eraser to pull out some of the graphite that we see, or the pencil that we see inside of the moon. And then we're also going to be using our eraser to start putting in some of these clouds. And then for our very last step is just spending the time to refine our work so that we're really happy with the final presentation of it. So I'll be back in a second to show you how to use that eraser. Okay, so you should still have your pencil. Hopefully it has an eraser. And then if you have other erasers available to you, you might want to pull them for this project. So the variety of erasers can be useful to you because different shapes, different erasers do different things. So I'm gonna start just with my regular pencil eraser. And I am going to begin pulling out anything that got inside of the moon. So I'll come back and show you what that looks like once I've finished doing the moon. Okay, so I took my pencil eraser and I went around the edges here. And now what I'm gonna do, I'm not gonna use my hands to wipe that off. You can see my fingers when I'm shading, even though I'm not blending with my hands, just from holding my paper, have picked up a lot of that color. I'm gonna take a clean part of my tissue. Okay, so I'm looking for a clean section. Remember, you can use toilet paper or paper towel. Be a little more gentle if you're using a paper towel just because they're a little bit more rough. And I'm going to just kind of gently knock the eraser off. And you'll notice that I did not actually go in and erase all of the pencil that got in here. I'm actually going to use that. I'm going to blend a little bit with that clean section, going in that little circular motion. can also blow to remove the eraser. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make this side maybe a little bit brighter. So I'm going to go in with a bigger eraser and pull out a little bit more of the pencil that got inside of the moon as I worked. So I'm not sure how clearly that's showing up in the video, but in person you can see that there is a little bit of a difference in value there. It's not anything that's super significant, but there is a difference. All right, so let's go ahead and try doing some clouds now. So when you're working on the clouds, if you want to pull up a reference image, you certainly can. I think I am going to actually work with a reference image, and I will put that up on the screen for you so that you can see what I was working with. And I'm just basically thinking about the shapes that I see when I look at these clouds. So let's go ahead and think, you know, kind of a fluffy, more of a circular, and we're going to build these up slowly. So I'm just moving my eraser back and forth right now, gently in kind of like an arch. I'm going to switch erasers, and I'm going to go in with just a pencil eraser, and I'm going to just kind of like pop in what's called a contour line. And this is just kind of outlining those clouds a little bit, helping me to kind of map out where they are. Okay, so now my job is, once I've kind of gotten that contour, those outlines in, is to start thinking about the different layers of the clouds. So which areas might be brightest, which areas may be a little bit darker. So I'm going to go ahead in with my eraser and start trying to work on the areas that I think are going to be my brightest sections of my clouds. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at my reference image, and I am trying to erase the areas where I feel like I have the brightest value showing, so that brightest white in the photograph I'm looking at. And then I'm going to start lifting off some of the other values that are there. Okay, I'm going to continue to work on my clouds, and then we'll come back and see what they look like in a couple minutes. Okay, so you can see I've clearly made some progress since we've looked at this last. And what I did is I used a combination of my erasers, and I used the pencil eraser to kind of map out kind of the contour or the outline as we talked about. And then what I did using that reference image, and it's not identical, it's a reference image. I'm looking at it to understand the way the clouds look. I'm looking at the values. And I was looking to first identify the brightest values that I see in the clouds. So that bright white that we would see on the value scale, that's what I'm looking at in the reference image. And then what I did is I looked at next kind of those midtones, so the 3s and 2s, and began lifting off a little bit of the value. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in and start adding in value with a little bit more detail in some areas. So that means I'm going to be using my pencil to kind of pop in some of those darkest values that we have of the 5 in some of these areas of the clouds to really make them stand out. So we'll take a look at this again in a couple of minutes and see what it looks like. Okay, so I went in and continued working, lifting off some value, adding in some of those much darker tones, and I'm going to keep working and refining this using my reference image, which I will provide to you in your Google Classroom and on Flipgrid, so you'll have access to that. And you'll see what this looks like when it's done. I think I'm getting fairly close, but I'm going to go ahead and keep working. And I look forward to seeing what yours looks like when it's done. Now, if you want to go ahead and add in the shading that you see on the moon in the reference image, you can, or you can leave it alone like this. I haven't quite decided what I want to do with mine. It's a hard call. So think about it, make your decision. I'm going to think about what I'm going to do, and I'll let you know if I add anything to it.